Hi. It's going to be really, really hard not to cause offense at this one, but I'll give it a shot. At some point in our lives, we were taught, for those of us who were either on the side of Judaism or in the transition going towards it, or just writing or attempting to write a middle line. You know, the further you go into Judaism, the more that pretty much the veneration of sages takes place. And there's always a really intellectual way of explaining how and why it's not really what it is. Now, of course, we're taught to question and argue and everything, and even in school, you're expected to question everything and argue out everything so that it's really solid. But the fact is that once you're finished with that schooling, you're expected to actually believe exactly what the accepted sages and the outcome of the arguments between sages, which is okay that they argued and stuff like that. It seems to be very open-minded on the surface, but the end result is going to be that you are expected to believe and follow what it is that was said by the sage that was accepted as being right at the end of any argument. And I wanted to bring up one in particular, Maimonides, Rambam, as they call him. And this person wrote books called Mishneh Torah, and in that book, well, the commentary that he himself gave about that book is that if you were to study and follow it, you would have a complete understanding of how to follow Torah. It's almost like the way that a lot of the commentary books in Talmud, they believe is a summation of how to keep Torah, on top of so many other things, of course. It's just a huge list of things that's included in there. But in Mishneh Torah, it was Maimonides' opinion that if you kept that, you would be keeping the Torah just the way that you're supposed to, that you would have it all summed up and stuff. Now, I examined this naturally, and I'm going to point out just one thing, because if you could see clearly one thing, you'll see it in lots and lots and lots of things from that point forward. And in there is the law of the Nazirite. Okay, now you know the law of the Nazirite if you read the Torah, because the Almighty comes out and says, this is the law of the Nazirite. He doesn't say these are the laws of the Nazirite, and there's this kind and this kind and this kind and da-da-da-da-da. So if you look in Mishneh Torah, you'll see that according to Rambam, there was 3 kinds of Nazirite, and one of them was the Nazirite, the way that the law of the Nazirite is in Torah, but one of them was a Nazirite like Samson, as he put it. And that kind of Nazirite could drink wine and touch a dead body. So if someone became a Nazirite like Samson, they would be following the rest of the law of the Nazirite, but you can fudge the wine and touching a dead body thing. So right here we see a process going on that many, many, many sages did many, many, many times. If you start getting into all them books and all that research, if you have already or if you haven't, if you were to, and at this point in life I'm not recommending that anymore like I used to, you'll see that it happens constantly, a repeating pattern, and that is what I consider nowadays justifying the wrongs of our greats in history. Now, if you read the law of the Nazirite in the actual Torah and do not add to it, because they say that, commentary and stuff in Talmud and a bunch of things, it's not adding to Torah, it's helping you keep Torah. Well, the fact is, in this case, we can see very, 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 very clearly an actual direct, outright change of Torah. Why? Because there is no such thing as a law of a Nazirite like Samson. The Almighty gave the law of the Nazirite right in the Torah, and it is exactly what it is. And you can't drink wine or touch a dead body, period. That's the law of the Nazirite, the law of the Nazirite. So when we read in Scripture and we see Samson was a Nazirite from birth, at one point in reading the story about Samson, you see him drink wine. At one point in the story about Samson, you see him touch a dead body. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it's very, 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 very simple and very clear. At some point in Samson's life, he broke the law of the Nazirite. That's what happened. He did so in the drinking of wine, and he did so in the touching of dead bodies. So rather than just, face that, someone in history come up with a way of explaining it so that he was still, a great hero, blemishless, and all of this, Justifying the wrongs of the great ones, I know we're not supposed to point it out or focus on it because we're probably not as good as, and stuff like that. I understand the respect, but there's not supposed to be a reverence. Respect, yes, but reverence is over the top. And creating heroes that are venerated, so to speak, out of people is a pretty big problem. And the sages did it with people in Scripture, and we were taught to do it with they themselves, the sages. This is just one example. There are so very many more that's similar. A way of intellectually viewing something. Also, in how we view them. Like if someone was very, very, very well versed in Judaism, then they're taught exactly what to think and what to say. If someone says all this kind of stuff that I'm saying, there will be a response that makes perfect sense intellectually for anything that anyone sees that happened in history, especially concerning Judaism. Well, it's not that, it's this. It's not that, it's this. It's not that, it's this. And I saw that happen so many times, and because I chose to believe in it, I would immediately believe exactly what the explanation was and turn around and repeat it to other people. And they'd be like, oh, wow, that makes perfect sense. Now I see. All I needed to know was this or that, and now I can still believe that Judaism is right about all these things. And it'll make sense. They've had many centuries of brilliant minds thinking about stuff, so, it's always going to sound very intellectual and understandable. But when you think with the mind of a child and observe things very clearly and simply, like the emperor's new clothes, the little kid sees something for exactly what it is. When you look through the eyes of like that child in the emperor's new clothes, you can very clearly see, well, the Almighty said this guy's saying this, and it's to justify the fact that Samson did wrong. It's not only him, even the greatest people we got in history, like King David. I read where someone had come up with an explanation about temporary divorce when soldiers were going to battle, so that it wasn't really an adultery. And, it says right in Scripture itself that was the one thing that he had done in his lifetime. And he himself ripped his garments when the prophet gave him that parable, and when he realized what had happened. And it's so obvious, but yet, if someone wanted to attempt to justify or lessen the intensity of something, they'll come up with a way. And they did. Some made up a bogus idea about, if a soldier went to battle, they were temporarily divorced till they got back, and all of this stuff. And it's just outright ridiculousness. But if you chose to believe in it, you would see it as logical and valid and understandable. And just pointing out these couple of examples, when you go and re-examine in your memories or in your studies, if you're going along the way of this, on that side, that what I see as a deviation from the straight and narrow leading to a small gate, if you're going down that other side, I'm always quote-unquote picking on Christianity, but, I went down both wrong ways, and so this is something I had to face, and it was very difficult at one point to face, but, it's true. They did add to and take away from Torah in many, many, many cases. And another thing is, a lot of people out there who are in a hybrid in-between path, they seek to follow all things. I'm not going to mention any names, but I know of several examples of people who attempt to, instead of walking the straight and narrow between the two deviations, they try and actually combine, the idea of Pharisee Judaism, or what became eventually Rabbinic Judaism at some point a century or two later after the events 2,000 years ago and stuff. They attempt to walk in everything that the sages said ever since as if they still had the ability to, from the seat of Moses, on top of also maintaining testimony of Yahshua, which, in Revelations it says that those keeping the commands of Yahweh and maintaining the testimony of Yahshua are the ones that will make it, and I believe this with my heart, but, following the Torah, the commands of Yahweh, in how Yahshua brought it about the clarity and reality and validity and depth and meaning of it all in his parables and sayings and everything, that would be the key. Trying to follow these sages that were literally non-believers is very dangerous, because they did not have the testimony of Yahshua, the one that spoke and lived Torah perfectly, as an example for us. And so any position come up with during all of these centuries, especially during medieval times and stuff, when persecutions were heavy and intense and cruel and all of that, the general mind frame in life and stuff and everything, it was just a different time. And granted, it was a billion times better than what was going on the Christian side of things back then. I mean, that was just the most vile, evil, murderous, hateful, terrible stuff that you can imagine. But how the off-trackness was being expressed in Judaism throughout these ages is very, very, very clear if you're comparing it word for word to exactly what the Almighty said. And if you're maintaining the testimony of Yahshua and reading the words in red and how he taught how to keep Torah, how to pray, how to live, how to speak, think, feel, and do everything that you do, when you re-examine the extreme Judaism, following the sages and what they taught and everything, you will see them come right out and always be very, very, very opposed to the idea of believing in Yahshua and the reasons why, and I understand that they were arguing against the false Jesus Christ of Christianity and not necessarily the actual Yahshua of history. This is true. But still, I saw the error and the wrong in both ways of going to its extreme, and I'm very thankful to have been out of it. But that's pretty much the gist of the speech. This one is that, following the writings and speeches of these people is not the way. Following what Yahshua said about how you keep Torah and everything was the way. So he should be our focus.